The deputy's tin coffee mug, still half full and steaming in the chill, sat perfectly centered on the sheriff's empty desk blotter. It was all wrong. That was the first thing that hit him. Not a feeling in his gut, but a fact in his eyes. The office held the quiet of a held breath, stale with last night's cigar smoke and the sharp, pine-scented floor cleaner old Mrs. Riley used every Thursday. Today was Friday. Sheriff's Day started at 5:15 on the dot, with the percolator hissing in the back room. By 5:20, he'd be in his worn leather chair, that same mug, the chipped one with the faded eagle, in his hand, his boots, soft at the left heel, propped on the desk corner. He'd look over the night's log, grunt once or twice, and that would be that. Cedar Rock's morning ritual. But this mug was different. This was the asterisk deputy's asterisk mug. The good one, the plain tin one without a chip. Someone had poured coffee into it. The steam curled up, thin and pale in the weak light from the green glass desk lamp. Deputy Ellis Kane stood in the doorway, his own keys cold in his hand. He didn't step in right away. He watched the steam rise. He listened. The only sound was the wall clock behind the desk, a slow, heavy asterisk tick. Tick, tick asterisk, like it was counting down to something. The dread wasn't a sudden thing. It was the low kind, the kind you live with in a quiet town where quiet sometimes means trouble sleeping, and sometimes means trouble brewing. This felt like the latter. He finally moved, his boots sounding too loud on the wooden floor. He circled the desk. The coffee had left a perfect, ghostly ring on top of a week-old complaint form. A rancher arguing with his neighbor over a strayed cow. Ellis ran a finger over the ring. The paper was damp. This coffee was fresh. Very fresh. He looked at the mug again. Why use his mug? A courtesy. For who? The sheriff hated this mug, said it was too fancy. A prank, then? But the sheriff wasn't a prankster. Not at 5 in the morning. Ellis turned and looked out the front window. Main Street was dark, just a single streetlight flickering by the post office. Nothing moved. He walked to the back door of the office, the one that led out to the small yard, the corral, and the old stable they sometimes used for holding a drunk's horse. The door was unlocked. Not just unlocked, but open a crack, maybe an inch. A sliver of the darker outside world showed through. The sheriff was a lock-it-tight man. Always. Ellis pushed the door open slowly. The hinge gave its usual low moan. The cool, pre-dawn air washed in, smelling of dry earth, sagebrush, and the cool moisture coming off the creek 100 yards behind the building. He stood on the small porch, his eyes adjusting. The yard was a patch of packed dirt, a few weeds at the edges. The corral gate was closed. The stable door was shut. The sheriff's old hound, Jasper, usually slept on the porch here. His bed, a ragged quilt, was empty. Ellis whistled softly, 2 low notes. Nothing. A knot, hard and cold, began to form just under his ribs. This wasn't right. This was all wrong, in small, quiet ways that added up to one big, loud silence. "Sheriff," he called out, his voice sounding thin in the vast quiet. No answer. He stepped off the porch, the gravel crunching. He walked toward the corral, his hand resting on the butt of his pistol. The world was in shades of grey and deep blue. He saw the water trough, half full. He saw the hitch post. Then he saw the tracks. In the fine, dew-settled dust near the stable, the tracks were clear. 2 sets of boots coming from the direction of the back trail that led to the creek. One set, the larger one with the distinctive worn-down left heel, went toward the stable. The other set, a bit smaller, sharper-edged, followed. Then, the tracks got messy. A scuffle. A long, smooth drag mark in the dust, leading back toward the trail. The drag mark was deep. Ellis knelt. He didn't touch the ground. He just looked. His mouth was dry. The copper taste of fear was real, a physical thing on his tongue. He followed the drag mark with his eyes. It went maybe 15 feet before it was lost in the tougher grass at the start of the trail. He stood up, his knees popping. He needed to follow that trail. He needed to call this in. His mind split in 2. The deputy part said to go back inside, radio the county, follow procedure. The other part, the part that had grown up in these hills, said every minute out here was a minute lost. He chose the trail. He didn't run. He moved low and careful, his eyes scanning ahead and to the sides. The trail was narrow, used by deer and kids going fishing. The drag mark showed up again in a soft patch of mud. Something dark was smeared in the mud beside it. Not mud dark. Red dark. Ellis didn't let himself think the word. He just registered it. The smell changed then. Under the sage and the damp air, a new smell threaded its way in. Metallic. Sharp. It was the smell of a butcher's block in summer, the smell of a nicked finger, amplified by 100. It was the smell of blood, a lot of it, carried on a slow breeze coming up from the creek. The creek was louder now, a low, constant rush over rocks. The sky was lightening from black to a deep indigo, enough to see shapes. The trail opened into a small clearing by the water's edge. The creek here was shallow, wide, running over a bed of smooth stones. The sound was peaceful. What it framed was not. There, caught on the exposed, gnarled roots of an old cartonwood tree where the bank had eroded, was a tan shape. It was cloth. Leather. Ellis moved closer, each step feeling heavy. It was the sheriff's vest. His brown leather vest, worn soft as butter, the one he was never without, not in winter, not in summer. It was snagged on a root, submerged halfway in the flowing water. The water around it swirled, tinged a rusty, diluted brown. The left shoulder of the vest was ripped, a huge, ragged tear that spoke of terrible force. It wasn't cut. It was torn. Ellis stood at the water's edge, the cold spray touching his pant legs. He didn't want to touch it. He had to. He waded in, the icy water shocking his ankles. He grabbed the vest. It was heavy, waterlogged. He pulled it free. It was empty. Just the vest. He carried it back to the bank, dripping. He laid it on the grass. In the growing light, he could see the damage clearly. The tear. The dark, water-heavy stain that covered most of it. He turned it over, looking for anything. The left pocket had something in it. A lump. Not a natural lump from fabric. Something solid. He reached in, his fingers numb. He pulled out a stone. A single, smooth, river stone, about the size of a hen's egg. Grey and white. It was clean, dry, and perfectly round. It hadn't been in the creek long. Someone had put it there. Placed it in the pocket of a torn, blood-soaked vest caught in a creek. He turned the stone over in his palm. It was cool. Ordinary. And it was a message. But for who? For the sheriff? Or for the person who would come looking for him? As he stood there, the first real ray of morning sun broke over the eastern ridge, hitting the creek and making the bloody water shine for a terrifying second. In that light, he remembered something. 3 days ago, he'd found a stone just like this one. Smooth, grey-white. Sitting right in the middle of his own windowsill at his little house on the edge of town. He'd tossed it in his yard, thinking it was a kid, or the wind. He'd been wrong. This wasn't about the sheriff. This was just the beginning. And the clock was already ticking. Ellis's hand went numb around the pistol grip. He didn't even remember drawing it. The metal was cold and solid, a stark contrast to the trembling that started deep in his shoulder. The grey light of dawn had fully arrived now, but it didn't help. It just made everything look flat and washed out, like a bad photograph. The yard behind the sheriff's office was too quiet. No birds, no rustle of the old cartonwood leaves, just the low, constant rush of the creek down the hill. That sound was starting to get inside his head. He moved from the back porch, his boots crunching on the gravel path. Every sound he made was too loud, an announcement. He forced himself to slow down, to take a breath that smelled of damp earth and something else, that coppery tang that still hung in the air. He crouched by the scuffle marks in the soft dirt near the stable door. The sheriff's boot prints were easy to spot, worn down on the left heel, a pattern Ellis had seen 1,000 times. They came from the creek trail, walked a straight line toward the stable. Right behind them was another set. Cleaner, sharper-edged soles. Work boots, maybe new, or just rarely worn. They followed the sheriff's tracks step for step. Then, the story in the dirt changed. The two sets of prints came together. The dirt was kicked up, scuffed in a wide circle. And then, leading away from that circle, back toward the trail, was a deep, smooth groove. A drag mark. Something heavy had been pulled. Ellis reached out a hand, stopping just before he touched the mark. His fingers hovered. This was evidence. This was the start of something terrible. His radio was on his belt. The right thing, the deputy thing, was to call it in. Call the county, call the state patrol. Secure the scene. But his eyes followed that drag mark into the bunchgrass. The sheriff was out there. Hurt. Maybe worse. Every minute of procedure was a minute the sheriff was alone. The cold knot under his ribs tightened. This was his first real choice, and he knew it was irreversible. He stood up, clicked the safety on his pistol, and holstered it. He didn't touch the radio. He turned and followed the trail. The path down to Cedar Creek was narrow, used more by deer and kids than by grown men. The drag mark showed up again in patches of mud between the rocks. And in one of those patches, a dark stain. It wasn't mud. It was a rusty, almost black smear. Ellis didn't let the word form in his mind. He just catalogued it. The stain, the width of the drag, the way the grass was bent. He kept moving, his senses screaming. The smell of the creek grew stronger, wet stone and green things, but underneath it, that other smell persisted. The creek clearing opened up before him, the water loud and cheerful, completely at odds with the scene. The sheriff's vest was a sad, tan lump caught in the roots. Seeing it there, really seeing it, made his stomach roll. It wasn't just an item of clothing. It was a part of the man. Ellis had never seen him without it. Wading into the creek, the shocking cold of the water hitting his ankles and soaking his pants legs, felt like a violation of some normal, sane world. Pulling the vest free was like lifting a weight. It dripped on the bank, heavy with creek water and something else. The stone in the pocket. That was the moment the world cracked open. It was dry. Deliberately placed. A message. Back in the office, with the vest laid on a sheet of wax paper on the desk, the reality started to press in. The state police were notified. Their estimated arrival time was 4 hours. The town was starting to wake up. Ellis could see Old Man Peters across the street, sweeping his storefront already, casting long looks at the sheriff's office. He had to tell Mrs. Colson. That was the next irreversible thing. Walking the 3 blocks to their small white house with the blue shutters felt like walking 10 miles. His feet were lead. How do you say this? What words do you use? He stood on her porch, the morning sun warm on his back, and knocked. When she opened the door, wiping her hands on a floral apron, a smile already forming for the deputy, he saw the moment she read his face. The smile didn't fade so much as it froze, then just melted away. "Clara," he said, using her first name for the first time ever. We can't find Ben. We found his vest down by the creek." She didn't scream. She put a hand on the doorframe, her knuckles white. Her eyes searched his, looking for the part of the sentence he was hiding. "Is he?" "We don't know," Ella said, and it was the truth, but it felt weak. "We are looking. State police are coming to help." She nodded, a quick, mechanical motion. "You find him, Ellis. You bring him home." That was it. No hysterics. Just a simple, terrible order. And in that moment, he was no longer just a deputy filling in. The weight of the town, of this woman's world, settled squarely on his shoulders. Back at the office, the town began to gather. The rumor mill of a small town works fast. By 8 a.m., there was a small cluster of people on the boardwalk outside. The butcher, the bartender from the Starlight, 2 of the ranchers from the cattle dispute. Their faces were a mix of worry and a kind of grim curiosity. Ellis stood in the doorway, feeling their eyes on him. He had to say something. "The sheriff's missing," he said, his voice firmer than he felt. "We are on it. State police are en route. If anyone saw anything unusual last night or early this morning, I need to know now." There was a murmur, but no one spoke up. Just a lot of shifting feet and averted eyes. Then, from the back, a voice. Tom Gable, one of the ranchers involved in the dispute. A quiet man, usually. "Drag marks ain't from no animal, deputy." The crowd went still. Ellis focused on Gable. "What do you mean?" "Saw the ground by your stable when I rode past," Gable said, his voice flat. "That's a man dragging another man. Boot heels dig indifferent." He turned and walked away, leaving a deeper silence behind him. The statement wasn't helpful. It was just a confirmation of everyone's worst fear, spoken aloud. And it came from a man with a recent grievance against the law. The morning dragged on, each minute feeling both too fast and too slow. Ellis tried to do paperwork, to log the evidence, but his mind was on the canyon. The boot prints from the second man had led away from the creek, not toward the road, but up into the jagged, rocky draws of the box canyon. A maze of sandstone and shadow. A man who knew the land could disappear in there for weeks. Just before noon, as the anxiety in the office was reaching a fever pitch, young Billy Jenkins, the postmaster's son, came running in, breathless. Deputy Kane. I was looking for my dog down by the South Bend, the one where we swim." "Spit it out, Billy," Ellis said, though his heart was hammering. The boy held out his hand. In his palm lay a brass star, a sheriff's badge. Number 47. It was scratched, the pin on the back bent. "It was just lying in the sand," Billy whispered. "Like it fell off." Ellis took the badge. It was cold. This was the discovery that changed everything. The vest could have been torn off in a struggle. This was removed. It recontextualized the stone in the pocket, the careful drag marks. This wasn't a random attack. This was deliberate. This was personal. And the stone on his own windowsill 3 days ago tied it all back to him. The message wasn't just for the sheriff. The game, whatever it was, had been moving for a while. And he had been too blind, too trusting in the normal quiet of his town, to see the pieces being laid out on the board. The safe world of yesterday was gone, shattered. What was left was the puzzle in his hand, a scratched badge, a silent canyon, and a clock that had run out hours ago. The badge felt like a piece of ice in Ellis's palm, even though the office was warm. The little nicks and scratches on its surface caught the noon light. Number 47. It was more than a piece of metal. It was a promise the sheriff had made to the town, and now it was broken, lying in the sand like trash. Young Billy Jenkins stared up at him, his eyes wide, waiting for the deputy to make this awful thing make sense. Ellis couldn't. He just nodded, his throat too tight for words, and put the badge carefully on the desk next to the waterlog vest. The two objects together told a story he didn't want to read. Outside, the sun was high and hot. Main Street looked normal. Cars parked at angles, Mrs. Peters arranging flowers in her window box, the distant sound of a radio playing a country song. But the normalcy was a thin sheet over a deep hole. Everyone moved a little slower, talked in lower tones, and kept glancing toward the sheriff's office. The pressure built in the air like before a summer storm. By 1 o'clock, a state police cruiser finally pulled up, kicking up dust. 2 troopers got out, tall and crisp in their uniforms, bringing with them a sense of outside order. Ellis met them on the boardwalk, and he saw the quick, assessing look in their eyes. They saw a young deputy in a too-quiet town, a missing sheriff, and a mystery. He led them inside, showed them the vest, the badge, told them about the tracks and the canyon. The senior trooper, a man with a kind face but tired eyes, laid it out. "Protocol is to secure the immediate area, interview the townsfolk, and wait for our forensics team and a canine unit. They're 2 hours out. We do not go into that canyon piecemeal, deputy. That's how we get 2 missing men." It was the right call. The smart call. Ellis knew that in his head. He'd been trained on procedure. But his gut, a raw and churning thing since he'd waded into that creek, screamed that it was the wrong call. Every minute was a minute deeper into the box canyon, a minute further away. The sheriff was out there, hurt. The man who took him was moving, getting further ahead. Waiting felt like a betrayal. The afternoon sun crawled across the floor of the office. Ellis answered questions, gave statements, pointed on a map. He watched the clock. The hands seemed stuck. He could feel the town's patience, and his own, wearing thin. The state troopers were good men, thorough, but this wasn't their home. They didn't know that the sheriff always checked on Old Man Miller's place on Tuesdays, or that he could fix a carburetor as good as the mechanic, or that his laugh sounded like gravel in a tin can. They saw a case file. Ellis saw a man. He stepped outside for air, the wooden boardwalk warm under his boots. He saw Clara Colson sitting on a bench outside the post office, just staring at the mountains. She hadn't gone home. He saw Tom Gable, the rancher, watching everything from the shadowed doorway of the feed store, his face unreadable. He saw the fear in people's eyes, and the unasked question, if the sheriff wasn't safe, then who was? That's when the mirror moment hit him. Not in a literal mirror, but in the dark window glass of the barber shop. He saw his own reflection, the deputy's hat, the star on his chest that felt too heavy, the uncertain set of his jaw. He didn't see a leader. He saw a placeholder. A man who followed the rules because the rules were a safe fence to hide behind. He'd always been content to be the second man, the note-taker, the one who made the coffee. He realized, with a sickening clarity, that he'd chosen this desk job years ago. He'd chosen the quiet reports over the loud confrontations, the known path over the risky one. And now, when the man who had always led needed someone to step up, Ellis was perfectly prepared to follow the new set of rules brought in by the state police. To wait. To be safe. The impossible choice laid itself out in front of him, as clear as the drag marks in the dirt. Wait for backup, for the dogs, for the full search party. Do it by the book. Or go now. Alone. Follow the gut feeling, the knowledge of the land, the silent pull toward the canyon. The first choice was smart, and it might save his career, even his life. The second choice was foolish, dangerous, and exactly what the sheriff would have done for him. As the sun began to dip toward the canyon rim, casting long, distorted shadows down Main Street, Ellis made his decision. He didn't make a speech. He didn't argue. He simply walked back into the office, told the troopers he was going to check a few more outlying houses for witnesses, and he headed home. Not to his patrol car, but to his small house on Elm Street. He changed out of his uniform into old, dark jeans, a grey work shirt, and his most worn-in pair of boots. He filled a canteen with water, shoved a few protein bars into a pack, and took his personal rifle down from the rack, a bolt-action .30-06 he knew like the back of his hand. It wasn't department issue. This was his. He drove his personal truck, an old Ford with a noisy engine, out past the edge of town, away from prying eyes. He parked it in a stand of pines a half-mile from the mouth of the Box Canyon trailhead. The air was cooler here, smelling of pine sap and hot stone. The entrance to the canyon was a dark slit in the red rock, like a wound in the earth. This was it. The point of no return. He took a deep breath, checked his gear one last time, and started walking. The official search would begin at first light. He had tonight. The deeper he went, the quieter the world became. The sounds of town faded, replaced by the crunch of his own boots on gravel, the whisper of the wind through narrow passages, the occasional skitter of a lizard. The canyon walls rose up on either side, towering and ancient, painted in stripes of red and orange by the dying sun. He used the shadows, moving from rock to rock, his eyes scanning not just the ground, but the high ledges. He was looking for signs, but he was also listening. Listening for a voice, a groan, anything. He found the sheriff's belt an hour in a side gully choked with brush. The heavy brass buckle was snapped clean in two, not unbuckled. It lay on a flat rock, as if it had been placed there. Another message. Ellis picked up the two pieces. The leather was sweat-stained and familiar. His heart hammered against his ribs. He was on the right path. And he was being led. That's when the full truth washed over him, cold and clear as the creek water. He sat down on a rock, the broken buckle in his hand, and looked back at the twisted path he'd taken. The stone on his windowsill. The deputy's mug on the desk. The dry river stone in the wet vest. The badge in the sand. The belt on the rock. It was a trail of breadcrumbs. Each one was a sign he was supposed to see. Each one was a taunt. And then Ellis realized the stone in the pocket truth was a lie. It was never just a message left at the crime scene. It wasn't about the sheriff at all. It was a challenge. A challenge specifically for *Kim Star. The person who did this knew the sheriff's routines, knew the town, and knew Ellis. Knew he was the one who would find the signs. knew he was the one who would be left in charge. This whole terrible day had been a trap, and he had walked right into the heart of it, alone. The canyon walls seemed to close in around him, not with threat, but with a terrible, silent understanding. He wasn't the rescuer. He was the other piece on the board, being moved into place. The game was still on, and his next move would decide everything. The broken buckle was cold and heavy in his hand. Ellis sat on the rock in the deepening twilight of the canyon, the two pieces of brass digging into his palm. That pressure, that small, sharp pain, grounded him. The realization that he'd been led here, step by step, should have filled him with panic. Instead, a strange calm settled over him. The fear was still there, a low hum in his veins, but it was joined by something else, a quiet, focused clarity. His flaw, the one he'd seen in the barbershop window, the tendency to observe, to follow, to be cautious, wasn't a weakness anymore. It was a tool. The person who brought him here had counted on the deputy who followed the clues. They hadn't counted on the man who understood them. He stopped thinking like a pursuer and started thinking like the land itself. He wasn't just following a trail. He was reading a story written in scuffed dirt and bent grass. The tracks he'd seen were clear, too clear for a man trying to hide in a rocky canyon. They were an invitation. So, Ellis stopped accepting the invitation. He looked up, not down. The canyon walls were steep, but not sheer. A man who knew these rocks, a hunter or a rancher, could find paths a city person would never see. He looked for lines of travel that made sense not for speed, but for control. For a place where you could watch the trail below without being seen. He moved away from the main gully, choosing a path that was harder, a scramble up a crumbling slope of shale that clattered under his boots. It was noisy, and that was good. He wanted to be heard, but not seen. He wanted to change the game. From a higher ledge, he could see the winding path below, a pale ribbon in the gloom. And there, just where the path doubled back around a giant boulder, he saw it, a flicker of movement. A shadow that didn't belong. Not the sheriff. This shape was waiting, watching the trail behind. His heart thumped once, hard. So, he was right. This was an ambush. The sheriff was the bait, and Ellis was the mouse being led to the trap. The old Ellis, the one from this morning, would have frozen. The new one just melted back from the ledge, his mind working. He couldn't go down the trail. He couldn't go back. He had to go around. He had to get ahead. For the next hour, he moved like a shadow himself. He used the sound of the wind, which was picking up, whistling through the stone spires, to cover his own sounds. He used the deepening purple darkness as his blanket. His body ached from the climbing, his hands were scraped raw from the rock, but the pain was just information. It told him he was moving, he was alive, he was fighting. He circled wide, his eyes glued to the landmark he'd chosen, a tall, finger-like spire of rock that stood above the ambush point. He kept it on his left, moving in a slow, painstaking arc. The transformation wasn't in becoming a hero. It was in becoming a hunter instead of the hunted. He thought of Tom Gable, the quiet rancher. A man who knew cattle, knew land, knew how to move through it without disturbing it. A man with a recent grudge. The pieces clicked, but they didn't fully lock. Something was still missing. He finally came to a high bowl, a natural amphitheater of stone. Below, the canyon trail ended in this box canyon, a dead end. The last of the sunset was a bloody streak on the western rim. And there, in the middle of the open space, stood the sheriff. He was on his feet, leaning heavily against a red rock, one arm held awkwardly across his chest. Even from this distance, Ellis could see the tear in his shirt at the shoulder, the dark stain on the fabric. But he was upright. He was alive. A figure stood about 20 feet from the sheriff, half in shadow. It was Tom Gable. He held a rifle loosely, not aimed at the sheriff, but not put away either. He was just standing there, as if waiting. Ellis's breath caught in his throat. This was it. The final scene. From his perch, he had the angle. He could line up a shot. It would be clean. The thought flashed through his mind, hot and urgent, and he dismissed it just as fast. This wasn't about shooting. This was about something else. The stone, the mug, the belt, They weren't the acts of a man who just wanted to kill. They were the acts of a man who wanted to be *scene star. Ellis made his choice. He didn't raise his rifle. He didn't shout a warning. He simply started picking his way down the steep side of the bowl, deliberately letting a few small stones skitter down ahead of him. Both men below looked up. Gable's rifle came up, but then hesitated when he saw Ellis wasn't aiming. The sheriff's face, pale and strained, showed a flash of relief, then a deeper worry. It took Ellis a full 2 minutes to climb down. He was completely exposed. Every instinct screamed at him to take cover, to find an advantage. He ignored them. When his boots finally hit the flat sand of the canyon floor, he was unarmed. He'd left his rifle leaning against a rock 10 feet up the slope. He walked forward, his empty hands held slightly out from his sides. The sand was cold underfoot. The air in the bowl was still and heavy. He walked past Tom Gable. He didn't even look at him. He walked straight to the sheriff, his eyes scanning the older man's injuries. A bad cut on the head, the torn shoulder, exhaustion, but his eyes were clear. "You're a hard man to find, Ben," Ellis said, his voice surprisingly steady. The sheriff managed a grimace. "Took you long enough, kid." Then, and only then, did Ellis turn to face Tom Gable. The rancher looked older in the fading light, his face etched with lines of fatigue and something else, a deep, weary anger. The rifle was pointed at the ground now. "Tom," Ellis said, nodding. "Deputy," Gable replied. His voice was hoarse. "You came alone. They said you wouldn't. They said you'd wait for the troopers." "They were wrong," Ellis said. He kept his body between Gable and the sheriff, not as a shield, but as a statement. "The stone on my sill. That was you." Gable gave a single, slow nod. "Had to know if you were paying attention. If you were anything like *Kim Star." He jerked his head toward the sheriff. "Or if you were just a piece of furniture in that office." "So you do all this?" Ellis asked, spreading his hands to indicate the canyon, the sheriff's wounds, the whole terrible day. "Over a stray cow and a fine." A raw, bitter sound escaped Gable's throat. It wasn't a laugh. "The cow was the last straw, deputy. Not the first. You sit in that office. You see the papers that cross the desk. Do you ever see the people behind them? My boy, my Sam, he got into trouble last fall. Bad crowd. Sheriff here," he nodded at the sheriff. "He could have thrown the book at him. Could have made an example. But he didn't. He brought him home to me, sat at my kitchen table, and laid out a choice. Real frontier justice. Make it right, or face the law. My boy chose to make it right. He's been working it off, every day since." Gable's eyes glistened in the twilight. "Then this cattle business. My neighbor, he's a loudmouth and a cheat. I knew I was right. I went to the sheriff expecting the same thing. A hearing. A fair shake. Instead, I got a form. A case number. A court date 6 months from now. Procedure," he said. Gable looked straight at the sheriff, his voice cracking. "You used to be a man who solved problems. Now you just file them. I needed you to remember what that feels like. To have the system fail you. To be alone with a problem with no answer in a book." The sheriff's voice was low and pained. "So you what, Tom? You give me a knock on the head, drag me out here, tear up my vest, to teach me a lesson? To see if you remembered how to fight?" Gable shouted, the sound echoing off the walls. "And to see if **, he pointed at Ellis, had anything in him besides ink for a pen." The silence that followed was thick enough to touch. Ellis understood now. This was a terrible, dangerous performance. A play staged with real pain and real fear. It was wrong, so wrong, but the heart of it, the feeling of being lost in a system that had forgotten how to listen, that was real as the rock around them. Ellis took a deep breath. He looked at Gable, at the broken, proud man. He looked at the sheriff, who was watching him, waiting to see what he would do. The law said to arrest Gable. The situation said to be careful. But the human being in the middle of it all saw a different path. "Your vest saved you," Ellis said, turning to the sheriff. "That thick leather. took the worst of it when you fell. Tom here didn't shoot you. He didn't knife you. He made it look bad to get my attention. He chose a place you knew, a place you could survive in until someone came." He looked back at Gable. "That about right?" Gable didn't confirm it. He didn't deny it. He just stood there, the fight finally gone out of him, leaving only a hollow man. The final action wasn't a fight. It was a decision. Ellis walked over to where his rifle rested against the rock. He picked it up. Both men watched him. He walked back, the rifle held loosely in one hand. He stopped in front of Tom Gable. He didn't hand him the rifle. He didn't point it at him. He simply held it out, offering Gable the barrel to take hold of. "You're going to help me get the sheriff out of this canyon," Ellis said, his voice leaving no room for argument. "You're going to carry most of his weight. We are going to walk out of here, together. And when we get to the trailhead, and the state police are there, you're going to hand me this rifle, and you're going to tell them the truth. All of it." He locked eyes with Gable. It wasn't a threat. It was a deal. A strange, hard, frontier deal. Justice wasn't in the cufflinks or the courtroom today. It was in the long, painful walk home in the dark, bearing the weight of what you'd done. Gable stared at the offered rifle for a long moment. Then, slowly, he let his own rifle fall to the sand with a soft thud. He reached out and took Ellis's rifle by the barrel, his hand trembling just a little. The sheriff let out a long, slow breath. Ellis moved to his side, pulling the sheriff's good arm over his own shoulders. Gable moved in on the other side, stiffly, awkwardly. Together, the three of them, the wounded lawman, the deputy who had finally stepped up, and the rancher who had screamed into a void, turned toward the dark mouth of the canyon. The first step of the long walk back was the hardest. But they took it. The walk out of the box canyon was a journey in itself, taken in the kind of darkness that feels thick and heavy. There was no moon, just a spray of cold, distant stars far above the narrow slit of sky. They moved in a clumsy, three-legged rhythm, the sheriff's weight shared between Ellis and Tom Gable. Every step was a negotiation with the uneven ground. The only sounds were their ragged breathing, the crunch and slide of their boots, and the sheriff's occasional grunt of pain. No one spoke. Words had run out back in the bowl of stone. Now there was only the work of moving forward, one painful yard at a time. Ellis's shoulder ached under the sheriff's weight, a deep, burning throb. His mind, however, was perfectly clear. He thought of the state troopers, probably setting up a command post at the trailhead with bright lights and radios crackling. He thought of Clara Colson, sitting in her dark house, waiting for a knock on the door. He thought of the weird, silent bargain he'd just struck in the canyon. There was no rulebook for this. He was writing the page as he walked. After what felt like hours, they caught the first, faint yellow glow of electric light filtering through the trees. The trailhead. They stumbled into the clearing like men returning from another world. The scene was just as Ellis pictured. 2 state police cruisers, their headlights and roof bars flooding the area with a harsh, blue-white light. A canine officer was just gearing up, his dog whining with excitement. The 2 troopers from the office spun around, their hands going to their sidearms as the 3 shadowy figures emerged from the blackness of the trail. For a second, everything froze. The troopers saw the sheriff, injured and leaning. They saw Tom Gable, a known person of interest, holding a rifle. They saw Ellis, dirty and exhausted, supporting the sheriff. It was a picture that could be read a dozen wrong ways. "Hold it right there," the senior trooper barked, his voice sharp in the quiet night. Ellis didn't flinch. He just kept walking forward, into the light. "Trooper, we need medical attention for Sheriff Colson. Immediate. Shoulder injury, head laceration, probable exhaustion." His voice was calm, factual. It cut through the tension. The troopers rushed forward, carefully taking the sheriff's weight from them. One of them called for an ambulance on his shoulder radio. As they eased the sheriff onto the tailgate of a cruiser, the other trooper turned his full attention to Gable and the rifle in his hand. "Sir, you need to put that weapon on the ground, now." Before Gable could move, Ellis spoke again. "Trooper, that's my personal rifle. Mr. Gable is assisting me. He's been helping me bring the sheriff out." He met the trooper's skeptical gaze. You can cuff me for going against protocol if you want, but get the sheriff seen to first. Then, Mr. Gable and I will give our full statements. In that order." It was a tone he'd never used before. It wasn't a request. It was the calm directive of someone in charge of a situation, even if he was covered in dust and sweat. The trooper hesitated, then gave a short nod. The priority was the injured man. The next few hours were a blur of light, sound, and procedure. The ambulance arrived, its red and white lights painting the pines in frantic strokes. They loaded the sheriff in, and Clara Colson, who had somehow gotten word and driven out, climbed in right beside him, clutching his good hand. Her eyes found Ellis's through the window for just a second, a look of profound thanks and a world of worry. Then came the statements. They sat in the back of the warm state police cruiser, Ellis and Gable in separate seats, giving their accounts. Ellis told the truth. All of it. The stone on the sill, the mug on the desk, the feeling of being led, the confrontation in the box canyon. He didn't soften what Gable had done. He didn't excuse the fear and the danger. But he explained the why of it. The feeling of being unheard. The broken system. The desperate, terrible cry for attention. Gable, his head bowed, confirmed it all in a quiet, broken voice. He repeated what he'd said in the canyon. It was about being seen. When they were done, the senior trooper just shook his head slowly. "I've been on the job 20 years, he said. "That's one for the books." They took Gable into custody, but the charge wasn't what it could have been. Kidnapping, yes. Assault. But the intent, the bizarre context, changed the shape of it. The law would still run its course, but it would be a course that understood the whole story. The sun was just thinking about rising when Ellis finally walked back into the sheriff's office. It was empty. Quiet. The same stale, pine cleaner smell hung in the air. His own tin coffee mug was still there on the desk, long cold, a faint skin formed on top of the forgotten coffee. He picked it up, the metal cool against his skin. He carried it to the small sink in the back, poured the old coffee out, and rinsed it clean. The sound of the water was loud in the silence. He filled it with fresh water from the tap and drank it all in a few long gulps. It was the best water he'd ever tasted. A week later, life in Cedar Rock had found a new rhythm, but the beat was different. The sheriff was home, his arm in a sling, ordered to rest, which he was terrible at. Tom Gable was out on bail, awaiting a court date. The town knew the story, or a version of it. It had been talked over in the diner, the feed store, the post office, until it was worn smooth. On a cool Thursday morning, Ellis walked into the office. The sheriff was at his desk, doing paperwork one-handed, grumbling about it. He looked up when Ellis came in. Ellis walked over to the desk and placed a single, smooth, grey-white river stone right in the center of the blotter. Then, without a word, he poured 2 cups of coffee, one in the chipped eagle mug for the sheriff, one in the plain tin mug for himself. The sheriff looked at the stone, then at Ellis. A slow, understanding smile touched his tired face, keeping it as a reminder. "Something like that," Ellis said, sitting in the chair across from the desk, not the deputy's chair off to the side. He took a sip of his coffee. It was hot and strong. "I was thinking, while you're recovering, someone needs to handle the Miller dispute about his fence line. And the Jenkins boy needs a talking to about those fireworks. I can take those." The sheriff studied him for a long moment. He saw the same deputy, but the man behind the eyes was different. Settled. Sure. Not of the answers, but of his ability to face the questions. "You sure?" the sheriff asked. "Those are messy. No clear procedure." "I know," Ellis said. "I'll figure it out." The sheriff nodded, a deep, satisfied nod. He took a sip of his own coffee and gestured at the stone. "So what's the reminder?" Ellis looked at the ordinary stone. It was just a piece of the creek, but it was also a challenge he'd met, a fear he'd faced, and a lesson in listening that a whole town needed to learn. It was the weight of responsibility, chosen freely, not just accepted. "That sometimes," Ellis said, his voice quiet in the morning calm, "the most important thing isn't finding the right answer in the book. It's hearing the real question being asked." He leaned back in his chair, the sunlight from the window warming his back. The The scar of those 36 hours wasn't a wound anymore. It was a mark of change, solid as the stone on the desk. The town was quiet outside, but it was a good quiet. The kind you earn. And for the first time in a long time, Ellis Kane felt completely at home in it.